There's one more thing we can do. We looked at this earlier too. We can change the default aggregation. So default aggregation usually is sum. So when you bring in, say like for example, infant mortality rate. Okay. So if you bring into the column, sum is what is used, sum of infant mortality. Okay. Suppose we are interested in average. Okay. And that's what we're going to be doing whenever we use infant mortality in the analysis. Then you can go and change the default aggregation to whatever else that you want. In this case, we want to use average as the default. And of course, if you want to, for some reason, look at something else, you can always go and change it. But by default, average will be used whenever you bring in infant mortality. And let's do this for health expense per capita. It should be that. Okay. Default average. Okay. So now if you bring in infant mortality rate to columns, the default aggregation is used, so we have the averages. Okay. So right now it is the average of all the observations in the database for these two variables, so you get only 1 point. So the level of detail here is at the top. Very low granularity. Okay. Very high aggregation. Suppose we want to look at 2010. So filter to 2010. Okay. And we want by region, color there. So you have the regions here, Africa, Asia, and so on. There are only 6 points now. So the level of granularity is region. You have only 6 points. Now if you bring in the country, to label, so now the level of granularity is country. Now each country has, remember, we have how many years worth of data? We have data going from 2000 to 2012. Now of course we have, if we had not filtered, each of these points would be an average of all those years put together. Since we have filtered, these points are only for 2010. Okay, average infant mortality rate and average health expense per capita. Okay. Now, in the database, some countries, some years don't have a data, okay, for either healthcare expense or infant mortality. I think healthcare expense is where we do not have data sometimes, and that is indicated if you look at the message here. It says there are 23 nulls. So that means there are 23 observations where either infant mortality was null or healthcare expense was null. So let's bring in healthcare per capita expense here. Say the average to special and non-null. Right? So now the null warning is gone. So you have only valid observations in the visualization. Now from here we can see in this visualization that there are some countries, well, for one thing, with health, as healthcare expense goes up, the infant mortality rate is small, and for some countries with very low healthcare expense, the infant mortality rate is large. But there is a bunch of countries here, okay, with very low healthcare expense, but they are able to achieve very low infant mortality rate in spite of that. Okay. You expect countries spending a lot of money to have low infant mortality rate. But what is so special about these countries, okay, that have low expense and low mortality rate? So here is a case where it's a good idea to create a set like what we did previously. Previously we just did like this, right? So I'm going to just do like that and create a set. Okay, but instead what we want to do is to create a set in a dynamic fashion. Okay, so how are we going to do that?